Hi, so this is Anson doing the review of Part 2 of the Forever War. Okay, so, the Forever War, Part 2. Mandela is with his girlfriend, and they're back on Earth. And things are bad. And then they get sad. Then they go to space. So there are two things that are particularly cool about Part 2, and that is basically, number one, how the romance is used as a way to build onto character and plot, as well as the themes, the romance being between William and Potter, and numero dos is how the world building is used to bring out how everything has changed and how everything is weird. So, Futures Poggers. So part 2 begins with William and Mary Gay still on their ship, and it's the first chapter basically shows us how the two have kind of stepped away from each other right now. Because back in part 1, they had an intimate moment together. They had 2 intimate moments together, and so it was actually hinted at to the audience, but it was never really touched upon more after that. And so in part 2, Joe Haldeman really goes full throttle on this and goes balls to the walls in terms of writing romance, which I actually do kind of enjoy. It's got that subtle, sad, lonely, vulnerable type of thing going between him and Potter, but at the same time, they are both commonsensical enough to function as normal humans. You would be able to feel the emotion, is what I'm saying. It's not weird, it's not kinky, it's very heartfelt, sad, and somber, but emotional. So, right, back onto what I was talking about. It begins with the two of them kind of dating other people, but they meet up in a cafe and they talk to each other. In that scene, there's one thing that's very evident. It's that they both clearly still like each other. They can't steer away from the topic, which is how they're both dating other people. They're trying to go away from that conversational topic, but they keep on getting back to it. They're always asking, oh, how are you doing with that guy? And how are you doing with that girl? And it really, that chapter ends with a conversation. And the particular line was basically, if the guy, William was telling Potter this, if the guy is hurting you, then I'll hurt him back. And then Potter smiles and says the same thing to William. So, yeah, clearly, they care about each other. And it's a very, very strong teaser for the audience going forwards. This really is, again, just the beginning of this, of part 2 of the novel. But then it is addressed when we see Potter getting hurt, getting very injured, and just William not caring about any of his subordinates. Well, he actually does care about them, but he just rushes to her first thing, and that's when, we see that there's this very strong emotional connection between them, and the romance is more or less just kind of confirmed, because, yeah, they don't kiss, but obviously they're with each other. And yes, so particularly it doesn't do a lot right now, but we can see more of this going into the future. And so because of how William was always by Potter's side as she was being injured, and how he rushed there first thing, and how he actually thought of a really good way of helping her with this. I won't go into in-depth spoilers, but just so you know. Because of that, again, the romance is now much stronger. So instead of this thing that is more or less subtly hinted, we're actually shown the extent to which they care for each other, and how that really is an important part to William's life. Because most of the time we see him killing guys or training or just monologuing inside his own head, but seeing him take action for another person, that is a very significant event, especially in part 2 and in the beginning of part 2, because they're stuck on the ship and not a lot of eventful stuff happens. So they're stuck there, and seeing him do something, that really becomes a core focus of that part. So this is really this romance at the beginning of the chapter 2 not only sets up both of their character arcs very well of how those two will interact with each other. It also gives us the causes, the roots of their conflict, because they want to be together, but because of the way that the world has become, that becomes significantly hard, and that becomes this emotional point in which those two try to connect with in which those two try to persevere, and the book is kind of about how the world clashes with them. But that's on to the second thing, and I'll go more into that later. Yes, so the romance is actually finally addressed when William, after he finds out that apparently his mom's gay now, that he is utterly alone. So he goes on a date with Potter, and they kind of stick with each other afterwards. And we again see more of them living life on Earth and them finding themselves in each other. And when something traumatic happens in Mary Gay's home, we see further how William is essentially all that Mary has left, and Mary is all that William has left. And in their times of need, specifically when when William lost his emotional connection to his mother, and how when Mary had that traumatic event happening to her, how they both held each other closely in their arms, and that's really what builds. Because again, the character work done by Joe Haldeman was not bad, but it was not particularly beautiful or anything like that. But this is a very good way of building a strong emotional connection, in my opinion. And I think Joe Haldeman does a really good job of doing this. And again, this romantic thing between the two does play an important part in part 2. And so this thing with the romance really does have a lot of points of intersection with how world building is used to show how vulnerable and sad and depressing everything is for the two of them. So let's go with William first, because he is our protagonist. Now, he's a city boy in the book, and that was always told to us. He lived in Washington, D.C. with his father and mother before he went to the war, and when he came back, everything was different. Washington, D.C., of course, is the capital of the United States, and so originally, when he was younger, everything was, while it wasn't beautiful, it was still normal and safe. And the immediate reaction he has as he goes home, in which everything is fortified, everything is so high-tech in a sense, in which guns were the norm, and vulgarity and violence was expected even at a very young age. There were teenagers who were roaming the streets with guns and shooting and raping people, and it was just, while it would not affect him in any significant physical way, it really does break him emotionally, in the sense that he has lost his home and he can never go back. And the saddest thing is, deep down, William has figured that out the second he got off the ship. Well, sorry, not the second he got off the ship. Once he started seeing things, he understood that fact immediately, and there is no way of lying to himself. And so this alienation is further built upon when we finally see how, well, at first, that was the first part of the social world building, and in which violence has become a main thing. The second part it's done is in which sexuality is used. The way it's used particularly is basically that a lot of people are gay now, and that hurts him dearly when his mother is revealed to be gay. Now, William Mandela has always professed himself to be not a homophobic, essentially, but that is neither explicitly confirmed nor denied, because we do know that William does not hold prejudiced attitude towards any particular people, but it's still a very uncomfortable topic to deal with when something as personal and as close to you emotionally is now so different. And I don't think that was what Joe Haldeman was trying to do in terms of explore sexuality or LGBTQ or anything like that. No, it was trying to explore it was trying to show how much the world has changed and how that affects him on a very deep personal level. And by showing that how his mother is essentially undeified, in which her status as this caring mother figure has been torn apart, in that now she is just another average person, another new foreign thing, an entity that he can't connect with, especially with how she now has a lover. So he is, in a kind of sense, replaced in his eyes. So he feels unneeded, he feels unloved, and he feels unheard, especially by somebody like his mother, who would be the closest thing he has to a family prior to marrying Gay. And so that really hurts him. And that's another part of the world building that is used extensively to show this. Now, there are more instances, such as such as how the government, the bureaucracy, is used as a tool of showing how much power the government has over the people and society, and in which everything is stagnating because culture is not being cared for or nurtured. That's all good, but it's not as memorable, at least in my opinion, because it doesn't really particularly affect Mandela that much. It's a very significant part of the world building, I'd say, and it's very important just as much as those social changes and things that we see. But in terms of building up the thematics, the most important thing is how violence is a big part, because now he has to, because safety around him is taken away, and at the same time how the societal change in terms of attitudes towards sexuality has affected him personally, because really violence and sexuality is what has caused him this much grief in this particular part of the book. And sexuality particularly will also be something that builds further conflict for William. And yeah, the world building is done phenomenally well. It is not espoused in expositional blurbs, but it's really mixed into the whole narrative, in which particular details are brought up in conversations, and details are given, but to a very minimal and succinct. A word I learned for this, a word that I learned from the book was cogent. So yes, you could say that the manner with which the information was brought forth was rather cogent, and it was beautiful, and it was simple. So it was really easy to digest and understand as a reader without breaking the flow of the scene, while also crafting an image of the world. Because it's a truly phenomenal... This is a truly phenomenal novel, and the way in which alienation is so well understood and well conveyed in this book. I won't say that it's done a perfect job. It hasn't. It's not like, let's say, it's not a perfect representation of what it feels like to be alone and isolated, but it clicks very well with me, because I feel like I kind of understand how it is to see something be entirely different from a very personal and emotional perspective. And actually, if you see it from that perspective, you could actually maybe understand why Joe Haldeman chose to not put the focus on the bureaucratic changes and the wider implications on on information or other stuff like that, because it really doesn't affect William all that much, because all he wants as a person is just emotional connection. And these are things that apply to him most dearly. So these are obviously issues that are of concern to him. And yes. So essentially that is how world building is done to convey the alienation that William feels.